What's good, man? It's your boy Scuffy here with another reaction video, man. So y'all see what's going on, man. Look at the title right there. How these sneaky serial killers finally got caught. Feel what I'm saying? People be thinking they slick, but they still get caught. But before we start the video, man, make sure y'all hit that subscribe, man. Subscribe, man. We're on the road to 100K, man. That's important, bro. Show some love, bro. Cause I be seeing sometimes I be viewing, I be having mad people viewing my video, but nobody sub like that, gang. Like show some support, gang. But let's get into it, gang.
Bird leaves a toothless head on a golf course. This isn't his only victim, and he gets away with multiple murders for years. A child whose brother was eaten by starving neighbors becomes an almost invisible killer, while
What
another
the
man, a
fuck?
respectable grandfather, would never have been caught had he not once explained what the backside of a human tastes like after 30 minutes in the oven.
That's
These men are
wild.
7 deadly sinners of the highest degrees, men who would have killed many more people had fate or ego not intervened. Number 7. One of the worst serial killers ever, and certainly one of the strangest, is busy at work in his upper management job at a government office in London. This is always a polite man and is well liked by the staff. And even though he can be quiet at times, he's a conscientious worker and boss. His name is Dennis
Bruh.
Nilsen.
Bruh, look at his face, gang. Y'all telling me this dude don't look like a bruh.
As evening approaches on February 8,
Wow.
1983, he has no idea he will soon be explaining how he killed people, many people, and that he often sat with the bodies propped up in the chair as he laughed and joked with the corpse about what he or they were watching on television.
I'm about to tell you might not be what you want to hear, but
Shorty,
you
I
have
don't
to
wanna
hear.
hear you,
No
bro.
one likes to see a video where there are tons of pauses and
He neatly places his pens into his office drawer and announces he's going home. That is, to 23 Cranley Gardens, situated in a leafy suburb in middle-class London. At that moment, he puts on his coat, ready to face the wintry evening, and something strange and perplexing is happening outside his house. He's a clever bloke, Nilsen, there's no doubt about it, but my oh my, did he get caught in one of the weirdest ways imaginable. Some say Nilsen's fascination with death and holding on to dead bodies crystallized during his time
That is
serving in the
wild.
army. Some say it went further back to his childhood, and maybe he learned how to get away with murder when he was a cop. But it wasn't until he became a trusted civil servant in the 1970s that he really started.
Yo, chat too, that's a fact though. Like once they, when you a cop, bro, they show you all this shit, bro. You know the vibes, bro. So it's gonna be hard for them to catch
Thirst
them.
for company, not so much blood, more for friendships of the dead. Truth be known, he didn't enjoy the killing part. He really didn't enjoy the dissecting and dismembering bit, especially when the bodies were already in terrible states of decomposition. After his one true living love left his life, he started killing for company. In 1978, lonely and
wild.
depressed but successful at work, he invited a guy back. He waited for him to fall asleep and strangled him. This was at his previous house on Melrose Avenue, number
That's
195.
wild,
A
bro.
veritable house of horrors. One trick Nielsen had up his sleeve is that
Imagine
he's
to
an
invite you to the
alcoholic.
crib. Yeah, let's drink
Boy,
something,
could he
bro.
drink. He invited more young men back for booze, sometimes just tourists visiting the UK, armed with cameras and full of curiosity. Nielsen got them wasted and strangled them. Then
That's
they became his
wild.
friends. He washed their bodies, he stroked them as they lay in bed next to him, he propped them up in chairs and slapped them on the knee when something on the TV made him laugh, treating them like the living. But the problem with bodies is they bloat and they decompose. And Nilsen didn't much like watching Coronation Street with lovers who were stinking and falling apart. So he buried them
Yeah.
under the floorboards. He later burned their bodies in the garden near a stack of tires. Local kids used to come around and enjoy what they thought was a nice man having another one of his bonfires. At night he drank with the dead, and throughout the day he gave orders in the office.
Yo, the neighbors thought he was doing like a little campfire shit, boy, while he was, bruh. You telling me you're not gonna smell it or something, bruh? That's crazy.
He once explained his routine, saying, end of the day, end of the drink, end of a person, floorboards back, carpet replaced, back to work. But then he had to move house, and his new place, 23 Cranley Gardens, a lovely-looking 1930s semi-detached with Tudor-style exposed wood on the facade, was a large place, but with separate apartments. That meant no place to bury or burn bodies. But as you know, serial killers aren't quitters. They can't quit, and Nilsen kept on killing. This brings us back to the beginning. When Nilsen returned home that evening, he found a drain cleaning company outside his apartment. The other residents complained of often smelling something terrible in the air, and they didn't know where it was coming from. But get this, even Nilsen had complained to the landlord about that. Yeah, go figure. So, a hired drain cleaner named Michael Catron started looking for blockages in the drains, where he too could smell something akin to dead animals. Perhaps he thought a dead rat, but then he pulled out what looked like bits of meat. And that's exactly when Nilsen walked up to him and said the famous words, "It looks to me like someone's been flushing down their Kentucky Fried Chicken." But Catron was pretty sure it wasn't chicken. In fact, he thought he found part of an eye, a human eye. He sent what he found off to a pathologist, while Nilsen went up to his flat and went about his life as normal. During the night, he was in his vest as snow fell outside. He was doing a bit of drain cleaning, but there was no way he was getting out of this. The next day, the cops were at the house. It was a human eye. They asked to look inside Nilsen's flat, to which the polite man did not refuse. The place stank. The cops looked startled. Nilsen then pointed to a wardrobe and said, "I think that's what you're looking for." He added calmly, "It's a long story. It goes back a long time. I'll tell you everything. I want to get it off my chest." After being led out of the house, an investigator asked him how many. Nilsen, again in a calm voice, said 15 or 16 since 1978. There were bits and pieces of bodies all over the house. The police had never seen anything like it. One of them, perplexed, later at the station said, "Why?" Nilsen responded, "I'm hoping you'll tell me that." He killed 12 to 15 people, and the cops were never onto him at any point. Let's remember that many of his victims were young, gay, homeless men. To the police's shame, they were less than caring when those young guys went missing. Had the victims been wealthy, you can be sure the story would be different. And if it weren't for Nilsen's poor choice of flesh disposal, he might have had a lot more dead lovers. He died in prison, 2018, age 72. With this next maniac, his massive ego led the cops to him. Number 6, bind, torture, kill. That's what this man was known for. The BTK killer confounded cops and made panic pervasive for almost 2 decades in America's Midwest. He later became Dennis Rader, but only after he left many bodies on the streets and had his fun taunting detectives. Again, the classic quiet guy next door who might have tortured animals as a kid and played with himself dressed in stolen panties while peeping through neighbors' windows, but as an adult, he was just another normal-looking family guy. Rader had a degree, he had decent jobs, he married, he had 2 kids. He became president of the church council and was a trusted Boy Scout leader. But my God, was this guy sick in the head. As a child, he kept...
Looking for an easier way to get that LLC next to your business name? Say hello to Taylor Brand. You just go to
detective
what y'all think so far, man?
Magazines that showed women tied up with ropes and knives at their neck. Young Dennis tied himself up and fantasized about killing at the same time. He was just 14. He later admitted even getting turned on by the Rocky and Bullwinkle show when the damsel in distress got tied up on a railway track. And so bondage and torture became the thing for this father of 2. He got away with it time and again, and the cops were for a long time not even close to solving the crimes. That was until 2004, when Rader was pulled over and asked, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" That's when things went wrong for the BTK, a man who thought he couldn't get caught. On January 15th, 1974, he murdered a family of 4. They were the Otero family. He first cut all the lines to the house with his murder toolkit, ropes, knife, gun, and he broke into the house. There he found the husband and wife and 2 kids. At gunpoint, he told them they were safe, and that he'd soon be gone once he'd gotten what he wanted. He tied them up one by one and killed them all. Rader wasn't just a perverted sadist, he was also a narcissist. That's why he hid a letter in a library detailing what he'd done.
Out here killing shit. That's crazy.
I did it myself with no one's help. The code words will be for me. Bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. In another part of the letter, he tried to explain his madness, saying, "It's hard to control myself. You probably call me psychotic with sexual perversion hangup. Where this monster enters my brain, I will never know, but it's here to stay." He even talked about his heroes, H.H. Holmes, Jack the Ripper, the Boston Strangler, and other fiends. He killed again in much the same style, and again, this arrogant beast wrote letters. He committed one murder while he was on a Boy Scout trip, being a good role model to boys learning how to tie knots and make fires. Rader had some outdoor skills. Like Nilsen, he'd served time in the military. He'd even won a good conduct medal. He killed another woman named Nancy and another named Shirley. He wrote letters.
Bro, I hate killing
with
people like
titles
nothing,
of
bro.
death to Nancy
Love to
and
it.
Shirley locks. He said in the former letter that he was driven by Factor X, a force only serial killers would understand. A killer who'd frustrated the police just as the Zodiac killer had done, then just vanished. He'd stay vanished for a long time, but Mr. Rader was not immune to making silly mistakes. As you'll see again today, ego is sometimes the downfall of murderous men. What's dark and unfortunate is that in order to catch a killer, it often requires them to make a mistake. So to get justice, the police in some ways need the killer to strike again. But Rader, he went completely off the radar for many years, so there didn't seem like there was any hope of catching him anymore. In 2004, the BTK became a cold case. But Rader just couldn't stop himself. He sent a newspaper of a photocopy of a driving license of a dead girl. He signed the letter Bill Thomas Killman. Later, he sent more letters and even a puzzle with one of the letters titled The BTK Story. and another along with a package titled The Sexual Thrill Is My Bill. In 2005,
Oh,
he left
wow.
the cereal box in a pickup truck at a Home Depot. And although the box was thrown away, Rader told the cops what he'd written in another letter. It was then the detectives looked at the CCTV footage in the parking lot. They saw a Jeep Cherokee. He then had the temerity in another letter to ask the cops if they thought it could be traced if he sent them letters on a floppy disk. They replied in a newspaper article in the Wichita Eagle and said no, they couldn't trace that. Rader was no computer scientist, and he didn't know whether there was some metadata in the Microsoft Word document he sent them. It revealed the name Dennis and the words Christ Lutheran Church. It didn't take long to find a Dennis Rader who was the president of the church council, and lo and behold, he drove a Jeep Cherokee. DNA did the rest, and Rader went down. In court, his confession was likened to a speech at the Academy Awards. What a narcissist he was. But in the end, his self-adoration put him behind bars. Like Nilsson, he could likely have killed many more and gotten away with it.
Yeah, that's crazy,
for a
bro.
maniac like no other, arguably the sickest man that's ever lived. Number 5. The story of Albert Fish, once heard, can never be forgotten. The story of a seemingly kindly grandpa who committed crimes that would have made Jack the Ripper blush, that might have compelled Ted Bundy to proffer words of concern. He was also another man that thought he was too clever to get caught. Mr. Fish got off on not just inflicting pain on others, but on himself too. When he was arrested, X-rays showed he had a total of 28 needles deeply
Shoved
embedded
28
in his
needles?
thighs and groin area. Not only that, he often beat himself with a studded paddle and set his nether regions on fire. He claimed
That's
to have
wild.
murdered 100 victims all over the U.S., but we doubt that's true. Still, he definitely deserved all the monikers he got, which included the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, and without a doubt, he was the living version of the Boogeyman. At some point, he developed a liking for human meat, at times feeding himself and his kids on raw meat because that seemed like the closest thing. During this period of his life, he was seen by numerous psychiatric doctors, and all of them said he was sane, despite Fish telling him he had regularly hallucinated. If only they listened to him more. By 1924, still acting like the good dad of 6 kids, his psychosis got to a point that he thought that God was telling him to hurt people, often of a young age. But because he
I'm Nicole C, and I love Chuba Casino because
Bruh.
looked like a stable fella, working hard to feed a family, people trusted him. This was at a time when he kept various killing tools, which he called his implements of hell. He murdered people in the preceding years, but we only really know about one particular murder. In 1928, he responded to an ad in a newspaper, an ad made by one of the sons of the Budd family. Part of it went, "Young man, 18, wishes position in the country." The son wanted work, and Fish, using a fake name, visited the Budd family and regaled them with
Bro, y'all
tales of being
realize
a
this
single
shit is
parent.
like
They liked him, they
old,
trusted
like
him.
old
Fish told the
times,
son that
bro.
he had a
Like
job
it
for
would
him
be
on his
old
farm in
G's,
Long
like
Island.
old people.
There was
man,
no farm.
from the
Fish
old
wanted to
times.
lure him there and kill him. He did later confess that he intended to bleed the son out. Bud, excited, ran out of the house to buy a new suitcase, while Fish told the parents that his niece was having a birthday party and would like their daughter Grace to attend. Delighted that this man had given their son a job, they said sure, yeah. The last time they saw Grace, she and Fish were holding hands and waving goodbye as they entered the dark mouth of a subway station. It was 6 long years before Mrs. Budd discovered what had happened to her daughter. One day she woke up to find a letter addressed to her. She was illiterate, so she asked one of her sons to read it. Here are some of the parts of possibly one of the worst letters sent in history. "My dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At that time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor." Fish went on to talk about how these people became cannibals and acquired a taste for human flesh, young flesh, according to Fish. This was all fiction, of course. Fish was just being a creative demon. He wrote in another part of the letter, he was roasted in the oven, boiled, broiled, fried, stewed, that kind of thing. Then he talked about his own taste for flesh and the time he invited Grace to his house and fed her strawberries and pot cheese. He said he took her to an empty house and prepared himself while she picked wildflowers without a care in the world. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. You can guess what happened next, especially when we tell you he used the word sweet and tender. He was talking about meat, not personality. The cops were not surprisingly shocked, and even though the part about Hong Kong could not be verified, the part about Grace looked like the truth. But Fish, too confident for his own good, had used an envelope with the letters NYPCBA on it. That stood for New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. The police discovered that the envelope had belonged to a janitor, and he had left it at 200 East 52nd Street after he moved out. The landlady there said another guy had lived there but had just moved out too. His name was Fish. Detective William F. King got on the case and found this Fish guy who pulled out a razor blade after being escorted to the police station. He was easily wrestled to the floor, and not long after, in an interview, he admitted to killing Grace Budd and other young folk. Subsequent investigations found that Mr. Fish wasn't just a killer, but he was an avowed madman with sadistic impulses. He later admitted to not just killing, but mutilating and drinking blood, after which he ate the flesh. That's when a newspaper rightly called him the most vicious killer in criminal history. At the trial, psychiatrists invoked numerous words, isms, and ilias, which most people had probably never heard before. They called him a psychiatric phenomenon, of which he definitely was, but he wasn't insane by the standards of the law. To think he would have gotten away with it had he not written that letter. On January 16, 1936, Fish uttered the words, "I don't even know why I'm here," right before the switch was pulled for the electric chair. Prior to that, he had written a detailed document as to the full extent of his crimes and passed it to his lawyer, James Dempsey. When journalists asked Dempsey about the contents, he replied, "I will never show it to anyone." As you will now see, other maniacs could have gotten away with murder. Many more murders, in fact. And they would have continued had the cops not been given the facts on a silver platter. Number 4.
That's crazy.
If ever there was a serial killer who a casting agent would want to play the devil in human form in a movie, it would be the British killer Peter Sutcliffe. Let's now talk about how he got away with killing for so long. The date was July 1979, and a police constable named Andy Laptew had just knocked on the door of a fairly nice-looking semi-detached house in Yorkshire, in the north of England. A woman invited him in for a cup of tea, and her husband Peter joined them. Laptew was one of the many cops who'd been looking for a man who'd been plaguing this part of industrial England for years. The police had so much paperwork for the case that the room where it was kept had to have a reinforced floor so it wouldn't give in to the weight. Somewhere in that paperwork, Sutcliffe's name popped up many times, but the organization was so bad it was hard to connect the dots. But when Laptew spoke to this man, he got a feeling that this could be the guy they were looking for. After all, he was a dead ringer for the police sketches compiled by some survivors of the attacks. When this young officer told his boss about this suspicious man, he received the loud reply, "Anybody mention photo fits to me again will be doing traffic for the rest of their service." After that, Sutcliffe went on killing. His MO was just about always the same. He'd sneak up behind...
Oh my God, here we go. Kimberly calculated from the beginning. How do I
the woman at night and bash them over the head with a hammer. After that, he often went to work with a knife, hence he got the name the Yorkshire Ripper. The women were often poor, with some of them selling their bodies on the streets in some of England's most run-down areas of Leeds and Bradford, places that looked as though they belonged not in wealthy England, but some of the poorest places on the planet. This is one of the reasons why the cops were later criticized. Had the victims been well off, perhaps they'd have felt more pressure to solve the case. In truth, they tried hard, but their minds and investigation techniques were old. The case ruined not just the victims' lives and their families' lives, but it made the hard-working investigators so ill, some of them died from stress-related illness way before their time. Still, when at first it seemed as though the Ripper was only killing prostitutes, the cops seemed less than compassionate. When it seemed Sutcliffe had killed the first woman who wasn't a prostitute, unbelievably the cops issued a statement saying that the Ripper is now killing innocent girls. They were all innocent, of course, but that statement shows how the cops felt and how out of date their thinking was. As the years passed, more and more women were being found with similar injuries, but the police didn't always connect the killings. They had an innumerable amount of survivors coming forward, some stating this man had a definite Yorkshire accent and that he had dark hair with a dark beard. They actually interviewed Sutcliffe 9 times during the long investigation, but he was let go each time. After all, he was a working man with a wife and they shared a nice house. He didn't look like a killer. As you now know, it can literally be a fatal mistake to discount people who don't look like killers. Serial killers will look like you, like me, like your neighbor, and like your boss. Then in 1977, Sutcliffe made his fatal mistake. He was already many victims in, so this time he decided to choose the city of Manchester for his next killing, about a 45-minute drive from Bradford. He killed her, mutilated her, and left the scene. But later, he realized he'd given this woman a £5 note for services that were never rendered. Furious with himself, he drove back to this bit of wasteland to retrieve the note. When he couldn't find it, in anger, he almost took the head off of her with a spanner. Knowing how mean the streets were, the clever woman had hidden the note in a secret compartment in her purse. But the cops found it. Tracking a note isn't easy, as you would guess, and it took some pretty amazing police work to eventually find out that that note had been paid to someone who worked at a T&WH Clark Holdings, where Sutcliffe had a job as a driver. He was interviewed like all the staff, and when police interviewed him again at his house, his wife lied and gave him an alibi for the night of the murder. She didn't actually know about his extramarital murderous activities. Then the cops received a tape recording in the post. It read, "I'm Jack. I see you're having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you're no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. George was the lead investigator, a man who'd soon die from stress, but George was stubborn, and he was convinced that the guy on the tape was the killer, even though his accent was not from Bradford or even close by. The man was a hoaxer, and he later sent a letter to a newspaper that read, "I am the Ripper. I've been dubbed a maniac by the press, but not by you. You call me clever, and I am. You and your mates haven't a clue that the photo in the paper gave me fits. Even the FBI's behavioral unit, who literally invented criminal profiling, went over to England and said that man is not the killer. But those Yorkshire cops kept looking for the man who'd been dubbed Wareside Jack due to his accent, while Sutcliffe murdered more women. Then the unbelievable happened. Even in a case already implausibly bad, one of Sutcliffe's buddies, who long suspected his friend was the Yorkshire Ripper, sent a letter to the police. It was marked priority number 1, and it read, "I've good reason to know the man you are looking for in the Ripper case. This man has dealings with prostitutes and always had a thing about them. His name and address is Peter Sutcliffe, 5 Garden Lane, Heaton, Bradford, Shipley." Remember, the police had already interviewed Sutcliffe 9 times and had been to that house. He looked almost identical to the man in the sketches, and he had a Yorkshire accent, just as some survivors had said. For Pete's sake, he even worked where the note came from. That friend even went to the police station soon after to say what he knew verbally, but it seems he was ignored again, to the cops' utter discredit. That talk he had at the police station, which must have been noted in the station files, seemed to have not happened. The police later said all the evidence of the chat had somehow disappeared, and so Sutcliffe was preparing himself to kill again. He couldn't believe his luck, even though he just killed a woman with a hammer and severely mutilated her. That murder had not even been connected to the other murders in Bradford. It was a carbon copy in a city that didn't have many murders. Sutcliffe thought he could just keep doing this forever. He later said God must have been helping him, but no, it was just shoddy police work. He killed again, even after being charged with a DUI. He then attacked a woman studying at Leeds University who'd been so scared she slept with a knife under her bed.
Wow.
Sutcliffe's buddy died from a heart attack, so he wasn't alive to hear that on January 2nd, 1981, a man had been pulled over in the city of Sheffield, not far from Bradford. It was just a routine stop at a police check, but the guy that stopped him was still in police training. He soon discovered that Sutcliffe's car had a fake license plate. It was then recalled that this guy looked a bit like those sketches he'd seen in the newspapers. Sutcliffe.
Why is filing your taxes with Free Tax USA different?
Well,
Well, for starters, our premium...
Then said he needed to pee, and so before the cop took him in for further questioning, he was allowed to go for one. There, out of the view of the officer, he threw things over a wall: a knife, a hammer, and some rope. In the police station, they had no idea they had the Ripper, and Sutcliffe was sent to a holding cell without being searched. He not only had another knife on him, but he was wearing a V-neck sweater on his legs, the kind of undergarment that gave easy access to his private parts for when he killed. The next day, the cops went back to the scene after the constable had told the peeing story. They found the evidence and were soon interrogating Sutcliffe. He held out for a bit, but cracked in the end, saying, "The women I killed were filth. I was just cleaning up the place a bit." In court, it was incredible that the judge said this: while some of the victims were prostitutes, perhaps the saddest part of this case is that some were not. The last 6 attacks were on totally respectable women. Sutcliffe went to prison and then to Broadmoor High Security Psychiatric Hospital, a place where he was viciously attacked and lost sight in one eye after someone put a pin through it. He was attacked more times after that. He lasted until 2020 when he died of heart conditions as well as COVID.
Damn.
This next killer is straight.
Yo, chat. If y'all enjoyed this reaction video, man, make sure y'all leave a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe, man. We're on the road to 100K, man. You heard? I'll catch you on to the next video.